All right, I brought in this new reference. I kind of copied the hand and brought it over, and now I've got to blend it in just because those talons are a little bit sharper. So I'm going to take the opacity of my brush to 100%. I'm going to carefully get rid of the hard edge of my lasso. And I can even blend in. I lost a little bit of that claw. It's tough. It's the ghosting of the eraser. There we go. I'm going to bring a little bit of that other hand that's underneath it, that coloring in. Again, so it looks pretty different. It doesn't look just like a copy-paste of my other hand. And once you get rid of the hard edge, then you can blend in with softer or lower opacities. And I try to never zoom in more than 200%, because zooming in more than that is just a waste of time in terms of printing or seeing it. Okay. So I've got that arm and that claw. I've got the bottom. Now I've got to transition the feet a little bit better. And I might first erase away from that polar bear belly, because I like some of the rib definition I get from the mouse underneath. As long as it can match color-wise. Yep, but I'm overshooting. So there we go. That works. Okay, now I transition the feet into it. And this can be a little bit trickier. Especially right here. So I'm going to show you some finishing tools now to help these things match. My creature doesn't have a tail. So once I can get all these internal edges to look the way I want, then I can just cut it all out. Trim the tail, trim the background. So what are the things, the finishing techniques? One is to help fill in gaps. One little gap I have is right here. So I'm going to use my move tool with auto select on to find that layer. It's this layer. And so maybe, what I mean by a gap is that you don't have something you can erase away. So if I trim that, and there's nothing underneath that works, yeah, it kind of works. Then I might need to bring more texture there. That would be a little hole. Let's see if there's another example. Right here, this transition, let's select that layer. Oops. And see, I've got a lot of overlap, so what I can do is use my lasso with a 2-pixel feather, and I can just kind of make a shaky edge here and cut it away. Delete, delete, delete. Right. And then I can use my eraser to blend. So it's not going from white fur to dark edge. I can transition between these. I'm going to even go in the 20s for opacity, or 15%. Because fur into fur is a lot like transitioning sky into sky. Even if it's clumpy going to softer fur, you see how that color can now blend more believably. So it's finding where you have gaps and if you have enough overlap to cover them. But I'm going to show you a tool that's kind of the opposite of the eraser, where we can build texture wherever it might be missing. Yep, and I'm going too far with my erasing. So, this is one of those areas. I have this red back, and that doesn't really blend with anything in a believable way. And so if I want it to be lighter, what can I do? What I'm going to do is a new layer on top of all my other layers. So I have my head folder, my body folder. On top of that, I can create a new single layer, and I'm going to label it Clone Stamp, all in capitals. This is a new tool all of you should know, so it's a good time to pay attention because it will be useful to you. Because it's a different kind of layer and tool, I'm going to right-click on the eyeball and set its color to red. So I use the metaphor of building a car, right? We've just welded the engine into the chassis of the car. Everything's built internally, but there's a bunch of junk and like welds and stuff on the outside of the car that need to be smoothed down, need to be cleaned up. And when I put the engine in, there are little gaps that opened up where we need more material. And if you fix cars, there's something called Bondo. It's like a cement you can use to kind of fill in between gaps. So that's the opposite of erasing, right? It's adding more texture from your available pixels. Now, we've done that before with internal compositing. So what do I mean by that? It would mean like taking this belly, taking a big chunk of it with your lasso, duplicating that, and moving that duplicate up to cover something, like the shoulder. And that can work, but it's a little clunky, right? And then I have to erase away from the edges. And I have to do it at 100% first. But what is the end impact? Well, I'm basically giving myself more to blend with to fix that shoulder. Well, there is a tool called Clone Stamp that we're going to use on a new layer that will do that in a much more targeted and effective way. I don't show it until now because students can tend to over-rely on it. And it has its pitfalls. But we'll compare the two. So this is internal compositing. Just taking a chunk and copying it, putting it over the top. I'll put that underneath the Clone Stamp layer and turn it off, right? And now let's try the Clone Stamp layer. So on this, I'm going to use a tool that's right above the eraser. So think of it as the opposite of the eraser. It's the additive tool. And I'm going to set the source to be all layers. That's important. If I'm using a tablet, which I am, I'm going to set it to be pressure sensitive. Its blend mode is going to be normal. Its opacity is going to be 100%. And then just like an eraser, I want it at 0% hardness, fairly large. Now what I can do with this tool, I'll show you on the gray background, is I can, on my Clone Stamp layer, click anywhere on my image, because it's sampling from all layers, hold down Option, and it will turn my cursor into these crosshairs, and then lift up and paint, and it will transfer wherever I targeted and stamp it, copy it onto where I painted. Right? So let's do that onto the shoulder. So what fur would work well for this shoulder? Well, maybe a little bit of this head fur right here. So I'm going to hold down Option, click, and then at 100% opacity, make sure I don't have a selection going on. Oh, I turned it off accidentally. There we go. So let's delete all that. Now let's do it again. So Option, click, lift, now start painting. Right? Option, maybe I want a little bit of this fur. Click, fill it in. The beauty is it's all on its own layer. So if I mess up, I just erase away from it or cover it up with more clone stamping, right? And then how do I use it to blend? Well, just like before, it's on its own layer, so I can use my eraser and get rid of its hard edges. But there aren't any hard edges because I used a soft edge clone stamp. And then I just take low opacity and I blend it in with what's behind it. So if I combine that with my internal compositing, this will be pretty effective to build a new shoulder for me that wasn't there before. Now this is all fairly nitpicky, but these are finishing techniques. And it can give a little bit of texture to the fur where the reference doesn't have it. All right, now I'm going to go to a really low opacity and start blending this in. So that's without the internal compositing. And that's pretty effective. Let's see with the internal compositing. That's less effective, right? A lot more, a lot less subtle. But if I layer them, I should be able to get pretty good control. So some of you might find that clone stamp just saves your lives, like does the work. And at any time I can go, oh, there's a little gap there. I don't like that highlight, so I just hold down Option. I use the clone stamp tool above the eraser, and I just fill it in. Let's see, from here. Keep getting that eye though. So I'm going to clone stamp some of this into here. Hold down Option. And then you just blend it in. Erase it away. Now you can see how if you overuse it, you start to lose your edges. And everything gets really muddied. So it's just for filling in those gaps. Working between two transitions. Okay, but now I like that shoulder better. Now, before I can show you dodging and burning, like creating our own shadows, I need to cut out the whole thing. So this is now what we do. I'm going to turn off the background. And to clean up the whole car, to kind of strip all this excess away, I first need to make a duplicate of all these visible layers. So what I'm going to do is hold down Shift, select all of these that I'm using, hold down Option, and then say Layer Merge Layers. And what that does is gives me a unified layer on top of everything